Hi, this is Clef and you're watching gametechtalk. Alright, so we have a lot to do today, talking about controllers, and I've brought 20 different ones to determine where the best value is, where the best performance is. We'll go over through them in form of a buying guide, and hopefully you'll get all the data you need to make an educated choice on what better suits your needs. Quick little game for you. I'll give you 5 seconds. Well, you can probably just pause the video. Try to see how many you can guess without even looking them up. Can you name them all? Let me know in the comment box how much you named. Now, there's no specific orders. You know, the way that they're positioned doesn't mean anything. It's not even for looks. The number one aspect that was considered when making that guide was polling rate. Of course, it's something that's been talked about for some time in controllers, and recently it just picked up a lot, and also in computer peripherals like mouses mainly. If you know what is polling rate, what is latency, all these things, feel free to skip to the next chapter. Essentially, whenever you push a button, your triggers or your sticks, it creates latency for the communication, for the input to reach the device that you're playing on. That latency determines the delay for the information to actually reach the device. So the longer the latency, the worse the input, and this is where you're going to feel like input lag if there is too much. But the other thing, which is also very important when benchmarking controllers, is the polling rate. To sort of keep it simple, say you push A, and within a second, an average polling rate of controllers is 125 hertz. For 125 times within a second, the controller is going to say A is pushed. If you have a polling rate of say 250, what it'll do instead is, rather than having 125 times sending the signal, it will say 250 times A is currently being pushed, and it's also going to say when you release it. And so by having a higher polling rate, you will effectively send more data to the device. It's hard to feel, you know, as you're playing a game, but for the game's behavior and just, I think your reptile brain, your subconscious, it makes you more agile as you play with higher polling rate as the time goes. But quite frankly, most people, if not all, if you give them a 125 to a 1000 hertz polling rate and they start playing, they might not even notice. There is a difference for sure, but it's not necessarily that obvious. But the higher it is, the better it is long term, and the better your abilities develop, so to speak. Having a higher polling rate does not necessarily mean that your controller will be able to max out that polling rate. So for example, and you'll see later on when looking at the charts, you have some polling rates that are up to 1000, but the average stability that they hit in terms of polling rate is going to be say 750. Now, having a 75% stability is technically still better than having 100 at 500 hertz polling rate, but it closes the gap. While the polling rate was the number one factor with which we've established the benchmarks that we're going to go into in a minute, we haven't considered feature at all. And it's important to understand that sometimes feature might be a better or more appealing something that you're going after. And of course, that will be because if we were to cover all different features, that would be an infinitely long video. So I'll leave that to you to determine, you know, if a certain controller has enough features or if it has features that you don't care for, so you'd rather not pay for them, type of thing. Now, the other thing is, you may have heard or you may not know at all, there is the possibility to overclock a controller on PC, of course. From my experience, overclocking is not necessarily consistent, just like overclocking a CPU or a GPU. And for that reason, I did not consider overclocking at all when making those tests. But if you're interested, I'll probably leave a link to a GitHub where you can get a program to overclock your controller. I'll leave again that to you if you want to test further after buying one of these products, or if you own already one that you'd like to see what happens when you overclock it. All the testings have been done through wire. If you use Bluetooth, you can expect a little more latency, and the polling rate, as far as I know, does not go over 125 hertz on Bluetooth, but quite frankly, with the new revisions, I don't know if they managed to increase that. The chart that we'll be using for the video today, I'll be sharing it down below. So later on, when I have some time, I will be adding dongle and Bluetooth. Keep your eyes peeled for that if this is something you'd like to know as well. Dongle is able to provide as much at least polling rate as wired, latency might be slightly different, but you have to keep in mind that when it comes to Bluetooth, when it comes to Wi-Fi, we're talking about radio interference as well. So depending on your environment, it might do worse. When doing my testings, that goes as well. You might have different results based off of the USB hose that you use, USB cable that you use. I've put each and every controller in the best parameters possible based off of the equipment that I have to make those tests. But you could find results that are slightly different. What I would assume is if you use the same tools and you're consistent with your cable and USB port on the device that you test, and you would test all these controllers, I would expect the percentages to be similar. Now, there's also a chance of having discrepancies between fabrication of one product. So for example, maybe all GameSir Nova Lite would not necessarily get you exactly the same results. That depends on how tight the quality control from said factory is. But I would assume that for the most part, all of these companies would have a very consistent numbers based off of what we'll see here today. All right, the charts. Now, it's possible that you have other polling rates, but from my testings of these 20 products, I actually found 4 different polling rates. You have 125, 250, 500, and 1000. This is going to be important because when identifying some of those controllers, we'll leave them to their own category, whereas sometimes we'll just look at the market as a whole. Of course, this is technically a small portion of all the controllers that are available. You have way more, but you should have everything in terms of the first parties, cutting edge, the value packed products, all the good things. If we look at the 125s, you'll see that the average is going to vary anywhere between 57 to even higher than 100, which can happen. That is not, completely far-fetched. And if you were to overclock, that could also go even higher than the ceiling that we see here. When moving to the 250s, same goes, but at least in the controls that I have, the range of stability was not as wide. When looking at the 500s, both of them were very, very tight in terms of stability. And then when looking at 1000, you'll notice that no one quite hit 1000 and the range is quite wide. However, that shouldn't make you scared of certain products necessarily right away, and we'll look into that later on. When looking at minimal latency, average latency, and maximum latency, they're there for your viewing pleasure. It's all very relative to what the stability is. In fact, the stability is based off of latency versus the polling rate average. When it comes to jitter, jitter is sort of when sending so much data, there is a slight risk that data breaks, but usually it doesn't really matter because, again, like say for example, we said pushing A, the information is sent 125 times, 250, 500, 1000 times. So even if it jitters a little, so even if the connection breaks a little bit, the information will still get through. Now, if you have lower jitter, essentially in a nutshell, what it means is you have better precision from the controller, but the likeliness of you experiencing that tightness in control is unlikely. Here, I guess what I'm trying to say is while the numbers are here, don't let that scare you off of the other numbers. It's still an important data to have, but it's not by any means a game-changing one or a game-breaking one. It's just a reality that sometimes the signal breaks, even when wired, but because of the amount of signal sent, it really doesn't matter at the end of the day. And when it comes to price, I really went for if available on Amazon. There are some exceptions here that are not, but we'll touch on that for at least one specific product later on. But yes, this is how we will determine what our next 3 categories are going to be. And these ones, if you fast forwarded, I still kept these ones because I want you to understand how I broke down the numbers so that it makes sense if you go and look at the charts, especially since I intend to add controllers over time and add, Bluetooth and dongle as well, if a dongle is available for a set controller. Right, so let's start with the first one, price per performance. What price per performance is, in a nutshell, is it's extremely, straightforward. We're just looking at polling rate versus price. Where is the best value here? And especially when looking at that, I think it's important to divide them by different polling rates, right? So let's start with the 125s. At 0.48 with the GameSir Nova is this one. an absolutely phenomenal performance. Now, yes, this is not necessarily the controller that will give you the highest pulling rate, as you can see here. However, it is extremely stable in terms of numbers, and what you get, even in terms of features, we're not touching base too much on that, but even in terms of features, this is a pretty impressive controller. But my point is, if pulling rate is not something that you're concerned with, I want to have the best bang for my buck, I want to have features, and I don't want to pay a tremendous price, the GameSir Nova is hard to beat. You have the paddles, you have HD rumble, you have compatibility with Switch PC, you have a lot of great things with that controller. You can even buy a dongle separate, if I'm not mistaken, to use that controller as well. In the 125 pulling rate, it is by far the best controller, and especially when considering how inexpensive that it is, which is surprising because you have a lot of clip from the future. You'll have to excuse me for looking a little crazy right now. As I'm editing the video, I realized by putting a background of the Nova trailer, the GameSir Nova trailer, that it supports 500 hertz pulling rate, and I was like, no, that's not true. As it turns out, when on the Switch mode, it pulls at a maximum of 125 hertz. But if you're using the X input mode, it does go up to 500 hertz, which makes that controller even more crazy. I'm not going to be reshooting the entire video, but I will be adding it to the chart so that you have the numbers. But yeah, that just made the GameSir Nova even more appealing because of that. Something to keep in mind. Great controllers in there, like the Xbox Series Elite, for example, which is a phenomenal controller, but again, when looking at features, it also becomes a completely different product because that one will work for your Xbox Series consoles, whereas the GameSir will not. That's why that guide is more leaned towards PC, but maybe you're across the board on different consoles and PC and handhelds. So you want to have the thing that will be the most versatile. That will be for you to determine. When looking at the 250 pulling rate options, one controller that I praised a lot when I reviewed it was the Easy SMX 9124. Now here's the interesting part. If you look at the Pro, I'm sorry, Easy SMX, I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus, but the numbers don't lie. If you're looking at the 9124 Pro, which is considered to be a superior controller based off of the fact that you have Hall effect sensors in them, but then when you look at the pulling rate, the 9124 is definitely the option that I would go for. Now granted, yes, your sticks will probably give out before, and they might experience drift after a year, 2 years, 3 years, who's to say? But when it comes to just performance alone, it is tremendously better. Well, 2 times better, in fact, than the Easy SMX 9124 Pro. Now, that was something I did not expect, and I did not know of the 9124. The 9124 has been available for quite some time and at super affordable price. And it's balanced between features, like you have 4 paddles in the back, you have X input, D input, Android, switch mode, you have backlit, you have a lot. When looking at the 500 ones, you have the Nova Lite. I just reviewed the Nova Lite. Do you know how inexpensive that controller is? Say you feel like you want to experience it for yourself to see if you feel a difference, but you don't want to spend too much. Like, I'm telling you right away, and we're going to talk again about this controller because it pretty much dominates in almost every category. The Nova Lite is extremely hard to beat. It is so reliable, such a great quality. Now, it is the basic most in terms of features. That's not at all the controller that will give you extra paddles and the HD rumble and, a screen on it and a software that is great. No. Where's the Nova Lite? There it is. So yeah, it is definitely not that controller, not even close. It's definitely going to be just a super duper cost efficient, reliable product. But that is the case if used wired. I'm pretty sure that one using dongle does not pull as high. It's one of the few exceptions where you'll see that. So you want to keep that in mind. You can't do better than the Nova Lite wired if you don't care for features. If you just care for performance, that's the one to go for. And because, again, you have to keep in mind, 500 polling rate, yes, there is better. Okay, I'm not denying that. There is superior on the market as we speak. But that one hits close to 100% stability every time. Technically getting very, very close to the 1000 based off of stability in that category. But let's move to that said category. When looking at the 1000 polling rate, now there's a controller that when I did my tests, I had no clue was gonna sit in there, which is the Sony DualSense Edge. And that speaks volume to just how great Sony designed that controller. I did not know that was a thing at all. Now I do, of course, but it's also not the cheapest. I'm just happy to, sometimes you pay a lot and yes, you don't necessarily get all the features, but certain things you just feel like you should expect. I was surprised with the DualSense Edge. Anyways, I'm getting sidetracked here a bit. So we have the Easy SMX X10 mechanic, the DualSense Edge, the Fly DG Apex 4, a killer controller by the way, and the KK3 Max in that category. Now when it comes to just, again, price per performance, the X10 mechanic is extremely hard to beat. This one right there. You don't have as many features as some of the elites because, when looking at the 1000 polling rate, you can pretty much take for granted that you are in the elite category of controllers. And when it comes to just the elite nature of it, it doesn't have anywhere near as many features as the other controllers in that category, but the price that you get for it is extremely good. And one thing to also mention is you also get mechanical buttons, which, if you're going for the absolute most in terms of polling rate, chances are that mechanical buttons are going to be important for you because they tend to have a faster response time, but more importantly, a higher reliability. So this is something you might want to consider if going for that category. There are definitely other controllers that are very interesting in this entire list when looking at the other numbers that were crushed. And then when looking at the next one, we're looking at what I call the Roundness Indicator. And the Roundness Indicator, what it does essentially is look at, well, first, rather than separating them per categories, we're looking at the all 20 controllers as a whole, and we're considering price, but also latency as well as polling rate. So this is really, kind of seeing who's the best jack of all trade and who's the most master of none type of thing. When looking at this category, the top three and third position, we have the Gamester Nova. I mentioned that controller was going to be back. In second position, we have the Easy SMX 9124. Again, that controller, I knew it was great when I reviewed it, but doing those tests made me realize just how great that it really is. In first position is the Gamester Nova Lite. And that's the reason why I keep going back to that controller. The Gamester Nova Lite is such a no-brainer. Like, even if you know that you're gonna buy better, I feel like this is a point of entry that you shouldn't cheat yourself out of, because first, it's so inexpensive, especially in today's, economy. But also, like, just it's so packed with quality, not features at all. I repeat myself, not features, but the quality packed in this product is mind-blowing for the price. And that's why it is top tier in our Roundness Indicator. Now, when looking at the last category in which I crushed the numbers, which is the Pulling Efficiency Indicator, and that does not consider price at all. It doesn't matter how much it costs, I just want the best. And that's really what it comes down to. So for this one, we're also going to look at it from different categories. When looking at the 125 polling rate, now the funny thing, and although I added it to the list, chances are you're either not going to find one or you're gonna have a hard time. I actually saw them on Amazon.com for $20. I don't know if it was just someone selling them, but the Stadia controller, now here's the thing. I'm pretty sure if it was never converted to being Bluetooth capable, you will not be able to use that feature, but you're still able to use it wired. And those tests were issued wired, right? But the Stadia controller if it was readily available and at the price that I have seen it, it would have been the best controller in the 125 polling rate. The problem is finding it. The likeliness of you finding one is fairly small, but if somehow, I wish I had one that was it avocado? I don't remember. No, it was wasabi. Well, I wish I had one wasabi, but unfortunately I never bought it, and I always thought I would have the time. If ever you have a Stadia controller, don't throw it in the bin. It's actually a very, very good controller. It's not necessarily the feature most heavy, but it's one of the few that actually have a 3.5 millimeter jack. The rumble is great, and you know, the sticks are analog, the triggers are analog. Like, it's a very solid controller. And in terms of performance, yes, we're still at 125 polling rate, although it often feels like this controller is overclocked from within, because it outperformed the maximum polling rate every time I tested it, and the latency rivals a tier above, because usually the 125 polling rates tend to have about an 8-second polling rate. The 250 tend to have about 4, 500 about 2 seconds, 1000 about 1, you know, so the maths add up. But that one, in terms of latency, it's like it's a cut above. But if not, both Xbox controllers, because they're so well, this one and this one, both Xbox controllers, because they're so stable, they actually do it incredibly well in the 125 hertz polling rate. But the one that outperforms everyone except the Stadia controller, that is the GameSir Nova. Now the GameSir Nova, again, the value and the build quality overall is just amazing, and it actually is quite decent when it comes to features as well. Now for what, I think $36 if I'm not mistaken. It's so stupid cheap, so affordable for such a great product. Special mention, controller that I have not yet reviewed, which is going to be not the next video but the one after, is the Memba 1. Now the features of this controller are, and that's why, you know, this is something that you want to keep in mind when also purchasing your product. But also in terms of performance, you know, it does decently well. It's just not necessarily the controller that tries to break the ceiling in terms of polling rate. It's just better than the average, but not completely up the wazoo. I think in terms of overall quality and features, it's an amazing product, and it's also quite affordable on the market. But I'll leave more information on that one when the actual review comes, which, if I remember correctly on my schedule, it should release on April 23rd. Now the third one, and the polling efficiency category, is the Amazon Luna controller. Definitely a very well-rounded product. Again, not necessarily the one with the most features, but one that was actually happily surprised from the quality, and it also has a 3.5 millimeter jack, which is important for some people. The second one in this category is the Turtle Beach Stealth Ultra. Now, I realized from making the review of this controller that a lot of people seem to be extremely on two ends of a spectrum when it comes to this product. Some people either love it and some people just bash it to hell. It's really a decent product. Don't get me wrong, it is not the cheapest, but you have to keep in mind that it does things that no other controllers has done in the past. And if you account for that, it's an amazing product. But also in terms of performance, like, again, it is not the controller that is there to break the uppermost ceiling in terms of polling rate, but it is better than the average with 250, and it is extremely stable within that range as well. So when considering that, it is one of the most reliable and the 250 hertz polling rate category. But the one that outperforms all the rest is none other than Sony's DualSense. The stability and the polling rate and how efficiently that it hits those numbers is just top tier in that range. And again, it goes to show that Sony knew what they were doing right off the gates with their controllers, because when that came out, it was, and still is, one of the best controllers on the market, and for a reason. Now, the interesting thing with the DualSense is that you can often find it on sale, especially like on Black Friday kind of thing. So if you're not in a rush but you never owned one, it's something you want to consider. But I think what makes it one of the most appealing controllers in the entire market right now is its extra features. Granted, you're not gonna have them on every games, unfortunately. Well, the rumble, yes, because that's just the motors they use, and it's a great quality rumble. But when it comes to the actual triggers and the adaptive nature of them, that is only when the drivers are available, and you have to use it wired to have that. You also have a 3.5 millimeter. Like, there's a lot going with this controller, and I think I'm not surprising anyone in letting you know that it ranks very high amongst the entire panel that we have here. When moving to 500, it's so tight that they're both great, but for different reasons. I keep going back to the Nova Lite because it's amazing. I don't need to say again why, you guys know. You'd like to have that, but with features, then look no further than the PB Tail Crush, because that controller actually is, well, first, and this is extremely subjective, so this is very, very subjective. I like when a controller dares a little bit, because I find that the most of the market right now is just a copycat of the shape of the series controller. And the PB Tail Crush, in terms of ergonomics, feels so different than anything else I've tried on this panel. And this is one of the reasons why I am in love with this product. I think it's great because it dares a little more. And the fact that RGB is part of all these controllers. GameSir Nova has an amazing RGB feature where you can turn the sticks and change colors. Anyways, very, very cool. However, the PB Tail Crush, they're actually making clever work of the RGB. So in a nutshell, what it does is you can change the colors of your buttons to match different layout. You can match the PlayStation layout, the Xbox layout, the Nintendo layout, or you can just go for a straight color. You can change like all the different aspects if you want your A, B, X, Y, but you want the color accents to be different. You have a magnet faceplate, so you can change that to different colors. Like, because it's a little more expensive, it's easy to dismiss, but it's a controller that deserves a lot of love. And I am really excited to see what PB Tails will be doing in the future, because the first controller they did, which I don't have, but was extremely wonky looking, but again, they dare, and I like that. And I tremendously love that with the PB Tails Crush. It's one of those controllers that I have not yet reviewed. I'm waiting for the manufacturer because there was a little bit of a discrepancy in the original order. So I'm waiting for that to be fixed to finally review it, but I'm looking forward to doing it because I think it's a great product. Moving on to our very last category. And again, when looking at just performance alone, the one controller I would not recommend technically in that list, the Extend Mechanic, because it performs less in terms of pulling rate. But it goes back to what I was implying earlier. If you just take pulling rate for what it is on its own, by having a 650-ish, if I recall, average pulling rate, yes, it's not as stable in the category as others. However, it is still higher than a 501. And if I'm not mistaken, when looking at average latency, again, it's not as responsive as the other controllers in the list, but it still does phenomenal in comparison to any other products on the list. So the Extend Mechanic is kind of that, we go back to what we were saying earlier, it's that value pack product in the 1000 hertz pulling rate category, because you have two paddles in the bag, because you have mechanic buttons, you have swappable faceplate, which is a cool feature. I'm not a big fan of their D-pad, unfortunately, but yeah, it's just a very, and it comes with a dongle, and you have the mount for the phone. It's just a well-rounded product that, if you want affordable 1000 pulling rate, this is where you want to go. But even though it is the one that comes fourth in that 4 product category, at least from what I tested. But in third position, we actually have the Goalie Kit KK3 Max. The Goalie Kit KK3 Max, which I reviewed, for me, now a lot of people seem to have quality control issues with that controller. I mean, to some extent, I feel like it's expected, and we're always going to hear the people who have trouble, understandably, but the people who are happy with it, they don't complain for the most part. They're just happy with it. So we don't know. It's really hard to know what the percentage is. And because of the popularity that this controller built, I would assume that this is probably one of the most sold third-party products in our list, because they built such a momentum with the KK2 Pro and being the first company to bring Hall sensor to the market. They were able to ride that wave, and I think that drove a lot of sales for the KK3 Max. Like, if you just type on Google, don't do it now, but if you type on YouTube, you'll see that there are a bunch of reviewers, me included, that covered this product, way more than any other products on this panel, except maybe the first parties. So I think this goes to show that, yes, a lot of people are having struggles with it, but I think it's also because they sold so many. It doesn't mean that your odds of having issues with it is increased. Personally, I have not had issues so far, but still, when looking at just this list overall, in terms of polling efficiency alone, it comes in third. It's still a little less expensive, but we'll get back to that. And second is the DualSense Edge. Now, the DualSense Edge is a phenomenal controller, but it is very expensive. Much like the Turtle Beach Stealth Ultra, that yes, the price is probably like at least top 3 most expensive on the list. The DualSense Edge is right up there, but it also has features that no other controllers have. And if you are playing on PS5 as well, then it kind of becomes this double purpose product that you may want to consider. I still think it's priced too high personally, but let's just say, because I also did review that one, and that was the outcome, that in my opinion it was priced too high. I will say, however, now that I know that the pulling rate is so reliable and the stability is, it kind of made me feel a little bit better about it, about the price mainly, because I always thought it was a great controller. I just feel like, if it would have been like 150, heck, 169, I think it would have been like. And then last but not least, the champ, and the controller that I was excited to talk about. And by the way, this is the next review coming out on the channel, the FlyDigi Apex 4. Now, chances are you might have already heard about it, but if you have not, please hold up for my review. That controller is bonkers. Absolutely bonkers. It is so feature rich, stupid good, best stability by far. Now, granted, I use a third-party software. If you use their software, they show you that you hit 1,000 hertz polling rate. I'm sorry to say I don't believe that. I think the numbers are being skewed a little bit, so that's why I didn't use their software to benchmark their controller. But even then, it still performed higher than any other controller on this list. It has a dongle, it has 4 paddles, and there's so many features. Please hold up for the review. It is so good. I can't wait to talk about it. Thankfully, it is $159. And what I mean by that is, if it was any cheaper, it would be like, if this is the best bang for your buck, so is the FlyDigi Apex 4, but the ceiling that you have to pay will be higher. That's what it would come down to. And as it turns out, so I did a little something, and this is where we'll end this video. I did a little something. The FlyDigi Apex 4, I went with the Amazon price. And the main thing is, having reviewed countless controllers and having talked with hundreds and hundreds of you on the channel, I come to realize that I guess not a lot of people are comfortable with buying on AliExpress. Let me know in the comment box. I didn't know. For me, it's like a no-brainer. If it's cheaper there, I buy there. Now, granted, in terms of warranty, it's not as safe. I recently had a problem with tablets that I bought, the Aldo Cube i50 Play, iPlay 50 Mini Pro. Both connectors came undone. Anyways, that's not here nor there. That's not the reason of this video. AliExpress was not helping me, and the vendor, it was just terrible. It was a bad experience. That's like the first time it happened in, I want to say, a decade, or almost at least. So I'm a little surprised to see that a lot of people don't seem too keen on buying on AliExpress, but I gotta let you know this. If you buy it on Amazon, which there will be links below, if you buy on Amazon, this controller will cost you $160. If you buy it on AliExpress, you're paying just about $100. And on AliExpress, you also have different bundles. So if you want to add a mount, if you want to add the charging dock and all these things, like you have different options there as well. Like if it was $100 on Amazon, just like it is on AliExpress, oh boy, that would be like, I'm so excited to review that controller. Please stay tuned for that product review. Just know that it came very close, very, very close. And the price per performance, because it's that good. It is that good. And technically, if we consider the entire chart, it is, if I'm not mistaken, top tier. Yeah, it's like pretty much neck and neck with the X10 mechanic in terms of just price per performance. So the FlyDG Apex 4 is also a no-brainer of a controller, one that you should definitely consider. Just a good product overall. And that pretty much sums it, guys. That was a long video. That was extremely data forward. I hope you don't mind it. I hope that was interesting for you. I hope you learned something. I hope you found the product that you like. If you have, please consider leaving a like so that this video is pushed to more and more people. If you like these types of videos, if you like gaming technology products, please consider subscribing to the channel. And if you're looking to buy any of those products, you have affiliate links down below. It helps the channel by giving me a small commission if you make a purchase at no extra cost to you, the buyer. And there was no sponsors, no deals with any of those brands. These are all products that I decided to pin up in a matchup by myself. In fact, they don't know that I'm doing this. So, there's no incentive for me to push a brand more than one other, if other than based off of the actual numbers. Now, the last thing I will leave you with is, I thought it'd be fun. I took the entire chart and I pushed into ChatGPT, and it gave me 10 different products to talk about, which I'll put the list on screen. But then I actually asked ChatGPT just from a pure mathematical point of view to give me the top 10 controllers out of that 20 list. Companies, don't go after me. I'm not the bad guy here. I'm just saying what ChatGPT said. And even ChatGPT is like, it doesn't consider features, which is something very important that you should consider when purchasing your next controller. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace. I'll tell you guys, of course, here we have the Stadia controller, we have the DualSense Edge, we have the EasySMX9124, the DualSense, the 8-bit Do Pro 2, no, actually that is the Ultimate 2.4 GHz in Bluetooth. This is the Turtle Beach Ultra, the FlyDG Apex 4, the EasySMX9124 Pro, the Switch Pro controller, the GameSir Nova, the Memba 1, the GameSir Nova Lite, the 8-bit Do Pro 2, the Goalie Kit KK2 Pro, the EasySMX X10 Mechanic, the Series Elite 2 controller, KK3 Max from Goalie Kit, the Amazon Luna controller, the Series controller from Xbox, and the PB Tail Crush.